When my daughter-in-law told me to leave the car, I smiled instead of crying. And even now I still ask myself why that smile came so easily to my face when my heart was breaking so loudly inside me. Because it was not a happy smile or a proud one. It was the kind of smile you learn after many years of swallowing pain quietly. The kind you wear when you know that showing tears will not change anything. When you know that the people sitting beside you have already decided not to see. You're hurt. And the car was still running when she said it. The low sound of the engine filling the silence between us. The road ahead stretching long and dry under the afternoon sun. Dust rising gently with every passing vehicle. And my son's hands were locked around the steering wheel as if letting go would cause everything to fall apart, his fingers stiff and pale, his eyes fixed straight ahead, not even turning for a second toward me, not even offering a glance that might have softened the moment, and that hurt more than her words, because I had carried him inside my body once. I had felt his small fingers wrap around mine when he was a child, and now he could not even look at me, and she sat beside him, straight-backed and calm, her face smooth and controlled, not angry, not cruel, just firm in a way that left no room for discussion. And when she spoke, her voice was low and even, almost respectful, as if she were making a reasonable request, as if she were asking me to step aside so someone else could sit. And she said, "Emmy, it's better if you get down here." And those words were soft, but they hit my chest like heavy stones, pressing the air out of my lungs, making it hard to breathe. And for a moment everything inside me went quiet, too quiet, like the silence that comes just before a storm, my ears ringing faintly, my heartbeat slowing in a strange, frightening way, and it felt as though time itself had paused. Even though the car was still trembling beneath me and the engine was still alive, and I lowered my eyes to my hands resting in my lap, hands that no longer looked young or strong, hands lined with age and work, hands that had woken before sunrise, for years to prepare meals, that had scrubbed floors and washed clothes until the skin cracked, hands that had wiped fevered foreheads and dried tears in the dark of night, hands that had held my son close when he cried from fear, from pain, from dreams he did not yet understand. And now those same hands were shaking, small and unsure, as if they no longer knew their purpose, and 1,000 words rose up inside me all at once, pressing against my throat, words I had every right to speak, questions that deserved answers. I wanted to ask why this was happening, what I had done wrong, how a mother could be asked to step out of her own child's life so I wanted to remind them that this was my son, that I had not borrowed him from anyone, that I had given my youth and my strength to raise him. I wanted to scream and ask where I was supposed to go, what place was left for me if not beside my own child. But my lips would not move, my voice refused to come, as if my body understood something my heart was still trying to accept. And instead of words, a smile appeared on my face, slow and careful, a smile shaped by years of learning when to stay quiet, when to bend, when to protect others even at the cost of my own pain. And I nodded my head gently, the way you nod when someone asks you something ordinary, something polite, something you can easily agree to. And I reached for the door handle with fingers that felt heavy and weak, opened the door, felt the warm air rush in, stepped out onto the side of the road, and closed the door softly behind me, not slamming it, not making a sound, because even in that moment I did not want to cause trouble. And the car pulled away almost immediately, the tires rolling forward, the dust lifting into the air, and I stood there watching it disappear, watching the shape of the car grow smaller and smaller until it was nothing more than a moving shadow on the road, until even that shadow was gone, leaving only silence and dust behind. And I stayed there longer than I should have, standing still as if my feet were rooted to the ground, as if moving would make the truth sink in too fast. And when the road was finally empty again, and there was no sign of them returning, that was when the tears came, not loud sobs, not the kind that draw attention, but quiet tears that slipped down my cheeks without sound, soaking into the lines of my face, carrying years of unspoken hurt with them. And I did not wipe them away, right away, because in that lonely moment there was no one left to see them. And as I stood there alone, with the sun lowering and the road stretching endlessly in both directions, a painful understanding settled deep inside me, heavier than any suitcase I had ever carried. And that was the day I truly understood that you can raise a child with all the love in your heart. You can give them your time, your strength, your prayers, and your life, but you cannot control where their loyalty will go. And sometimes the deepest wounds are not made by strangers, but by the people you once held closest to your heart. Before that day on the road, we were a family, or at least that is how I remember it now, when I look back through the soft and painful light of memory, because families do not always break in one loud moment. Sometimes they slowly fade into silence, and at that time I still believed we were whole. I believed that love, patience, and time could hold us together. Even though I was never a perfect mother, I was a devoted one. The kind who learned early in life that strength often comes from necessity and not from choice. Because when my husband passed away while my son was still young, the world did not pause to let me grieve. It simply moved on, and I had to move with it, carrying my grief quietly while learning how to be both mother and father to a child who still needed warmth, guidance, and safety, and life. After that was not easy. There were days when the meals on our table were simple and repeated, when I counted money carefully before buying anything, when I worried at night about the future while pretending to be calm during the day. But even in those hard times, love was never missing in our home. It filled the small rooms. It sat with us during meals. It wrapped around us when the power went out and the darkness crept in, and my son became my strength in ways I did not expect. His laughter gave me courage, his questions gave me purpose, and his presence reminded me every morning why I had to keep going. I worked hard so he could study, taking pride in every small achievement of his, as if it were my own, praying every night with my hands raised and my heart open, asking for his health, his success, and his happiness, dreaming quietly of the day he would grow up, find a good partner, and bring new joy into our home. Because in my heart I believed that a son's marriage would add to a family, not divide it. And when he finally told me that he wanted to marry her, I did not object, even though I felt the natural fear every mother feels when her child steps into a new life, because she seemed educated, confident, and modern, and I told myself that the world had changed, that daughters-in-law were no longer expected to live the same way I had, and that if I wanted peace, I must learn to change too. And on the wedding day, I welcomed her with open arms and a hopeful heart, calling her Betty instead of Bahu, because I truly believed that words have power, that if I treated her like my own daughter, she would feel it, understand it, and return it. And for a while it seemed as though my belief was right, because in the beginning everything felt gentle and promising. She smiled often, spoke politely, touched my feet in front of elders, and called me Ammi with a sweetness that filled me with pride. And I remember standing beside her in front of relatives, holding my head high, thinking that I had been blessed, that after all the hardships of my life, God had finally given me a daughter to share my days with. But slowly, very slowly, in ways that were hard to explain at first, the air inside the house began to change, not through loud arguments or harsh words, but through small shifts that only someone living inside the walls could feel. She liked things done her way, and I tried to respect that. She preferred silence in the mornings, and I learned to move quietly. She valued her privacy, and I reminded myself that she was new, that she needed space to feel comfortable. And each time something felt strange or hurtful, I pushed the feeling aside and told myself to be patient, because patience is what mothers are taught from the day they give birth. And my son began to change too, not suddenly and not openly, but in small, almost invisible ways that hurt more because they were quiet. He spoke to me less, choosing his words carefully when he did speak, spending more time behind the closed door of his room. And when I tried to talk to him, he listened, with his ears but not with his heart, his eyes distracted, his thoughts elsewhere. And I kept telling myself that this was normal, that marriage changes people, that a mother must learn to step back so her son can build his own life. And I swallowed my questions, my worries, and my loneliness, reminding myself again and again that this is what mothers do. They give space, they sacrifice attention, they fade into the background so their children can stand in the light. But what I did not realize then was that stepping back slowly turned into being pushed aside. And by the time I began to feel the emptiness of that space, the distance between us had already grown too wide to cross easily. The problems did not begin with shouting or anger or doors being slammed. They began the way most deep wounds begin, quietly, through small words spoken in calm voices. Words that sounded reasonable on the surface but carried sharp edges underneath. Words that stayed with me long after they were spoken, echoing in my mind when the house was silent, and the first time she said, "Amy, don't interfere." She said it gently, almost politely, with a small smile that made it sound like advice, rather than rejection, and I remember feeling slightly embarrassed, as if I had crossed a line without realizing it. So I nodded and stepped back, telling myself she was right, that young couples need space, and then another day she said, "Amy, times have changed." When I suggested something that had once been normal in our home, and again her voice was calm, not angry, and I told myself that maybe I was old-fashioned, that maybe my ways no longer fit into this new world she came from, and then came the words, "Amy, please understand." Words that sounded kind but felt heavy, because they were always followed by my silence, never by her understanding me, and each sentence was said softly, but each one went a little deeper into my heart, leaving marks that no one else could see, and over time those small cuts began to bleed together into one long ache that I carried with me every day. And it was not just words, it was everything around them, because if I cooked, trying to show love the only way I had always known, she would say the food was too oily or too spicy or not healthy enough, and I would smile and apologize, even though I had cooked the same way for years without complaint. And if I rested for a while, sitting down after finishing my chores, she would say, half jokingly, that I was becoming lazy, and I would laugh softly to hide the sting, reminding myself that she did not mean harm. And if I advised my son, even about small things, she would say I was controlling, that I should let him decide for himself. And each time I heard that word, controlling, something inside me shrank, because I had never wanted to control him. I had only ever wanted to guide him, protect him, and see him safe. But slowly I began to doubt myself, wondering if maybe I truly was a burden, maybe my presence was too much, and so I started speaking less, choosing my words carefully, sometimes deciding it was better not to speak at all. I spent more time in my room, sitting quietly by the window, watching the day pass, listening to the sounds of the house that once felt like mine but now felt distant, and I prayed more than I ever had before, asking God for patience, for wisdom, for the ability to accept whatever was happening without bitterness. And at night, when the lights were off and no one could see me, I cried quietly into my pillow, careful not to make a sound, because even my tears felt like something I had to hide. And my son stood between us during all of this, but not in the way I had once imagined. He did not raise his voice or argue with either of us. He simply leaned more toward her side, slowly and silently, choosing peace in the moment over truth in the long run, and he avoided conflict as if it were something dangerous, believing that if he stayed quiet, everything would somehow fix itself. But he did not realize that his silence was hurting me more than any harsh word ever could, because every time he said nothing, it felt like he was agreeing with her, and that hurt in a way I cannot fully explain. And others began to notice the change too. Relatives would look at us with questioning eyes during gatherings, sensing the distance even when no one spoke about it. Neighbors whispered softly, asking why I seemed quieter these days, why I no longer laughed the way I used to, and I smiled in front of everyone, the practiced smile of a woman who has learned to hide her pain well, because I did not want to bring shame to my son or trouble to his home. Even as my heart slowly cracked under the weight of everything left unsaid. And then came the day of the journey, a simple plan that I did not know would become a turning point in my life. We were going to visit a relative in another city, and when my son suggested it, I felt hesitant, a small voice inside me warning me that the tension between us had not healed. That close space might make things worse, but he insisted, saying it would be good for all of us, that a change of place might bring us closer. And I allowed myself to hope, because hope is something mothers never truly give up. I thought maybe time together on the road would soften our hearts, maybe shared silence would turn into shared understanding, maybe laughter would return, but from the moment we got into the car, the air felt heavy, thick with unspoken feelings. No one spoke much. The road stretched ahead of us, long and quiet, and I tried to make small conversation, asking about the weather, about the journey, about little things that did not matter, but my words fell flat, landing nowhere, disappearing into the silence. And then, without warning, she said at Emmy, "It's better if you get down here." And there was no argument before it, no explanation after it, just those words hanging in the air, clear and final. And in that moment, all the small words from before came together, forming one undeniable truth: that I was no longer welcome, not in the conversation, not in the cup, and perhaps not even in the life I had spent so many years building. And that was not just rejection of my presence, it was rejection of everything I had been holding on to, everything I believed about family, love, and sacrifice. As the car disappeared into the distance, shrinking into a cloud of dust that slowly settled back onto the road, I felt something break inside me. Not loudly or suddenly, but in a quiet, final way, like a thread snapping after being stretched too far for too long. And for a moment, I remained standing exactly where I was, unsure of what to do next, unsure of who I was, without the place I thought I still held in my son's life. And then my legs began to feel weak, as if they could no longer carry the weight of everything I had been holding inside my heart. So I walked slowly to the side of the road and sat down, lowering myself carefully onto the edge of the dusty ground, my clothes brushing against the dirt, my body tired in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with pain. And cars passed by, one after another, some fast, some slow, people inside them laughing, talking, living their lives without noticing the old woman sitting quietly beside the road. And no one stopped, no one asked if I was all right, no one even looked twice. And in that moment I understood how invisible pain can be, how easily the world moves past it. And I was not angry at those strangers, because they did not know my story. I was simply aware of how alone I truly was. Just another old woman sitting with her grief, holding it close, because there was nowhere else to put it. And as I sat there listening to the wind and the distant sounds of traffic, something inside me began to shift. That moment on the road changed me in ways I could not fully understand at first, because for the first time since everything had started to fall apart, I stopped blaming myself. I stopped replaying every conversation in my head, wondering what I could have said differently, how I could have acted better, how I could have made myself smaller, quieter, easier to accept. And for the first time I allowed myself to see the truth clearly, without fear and without excuses. And that truth was painful but freeing, because I realized that love that demands silence is not love at all. It is control wearing a gentle face, and respect that disappears the moment it becomes inconvenient is not respect. It is comfort that lasts only as long as it is useful. And understanding this did not erase my pain, but it gave it meaning. It told me that what had happened was not because I was unworthy, but because I had been expected to erase myself to keep peace. And sitting there on the side of the road, I took a deep breath and reached for my phone, my hand still shaking slightly as I searched for a number I had not called in a long time. A distant relative who lived not too far away, someone I trusted enough to ask for help without feeling completely broken. And when they answered, my voice trembled despite my effort to keep it steady. But I did not beg. I did not explain everything in detail. I simply said that I needed help, that I had been left on the road and had nowhere to go. And even as I spoke those words, I felt a strange mix of shame and relief. Shame because I had never imagined my life reaching this point, and relief because I was finally admitting that I could not carry this alone. And when they agreed to come, for me, I thanked them softly and ended the call, sitting back and waiting, watching the sky change color as the sun slowly moved lower. And when I was finally taken away from that road and brought into a home that was not mine, into a room that smelled unfamiliar and felt strange, I lay down on the bed they offered, me staring up at the ceiling in the quiet of the night. And that was when the weight of everything truly settled in, because away from the road, away from the dust and the noise, there was nothing left to distract me from my thoughts. And I thought about my life from the beginning, about the years I had spent giving without counting, loving without limits, sacrificing without complaint, about the dreams I had built around my son's future, believing that my place beside him was permanent, unbreakable. And I thought about how little I had ever asked in return, just a little respect, a little kindness, a little space to exist, without feeling like a burden. And lying there in the dim light, I realized something that hurt more deeply than the moment I was asked to step out of the car. I realized that motherhood does not guarantee loyalty, that sacrifice does not guarantee gratitude, and that loving someone with your whole heart does not mean they will always protect yours. And that truth cut deeper than rejection, deeper than abandonment, because it forced me to let go of the belief that my pain could be undone by explanation or apology. And as tears quietly filled my eyes again, I understood that this was not just a turning point in my story, but a beginning of a different kind of strength, one born not from hope, but from acceptance. And though my heart ached in a way I had never known before, somewhere deep inside, a small, steady voice began to whisper that I was still worthy of dignity, still deserving of peace, even if I had to learn how to claim it on my own.
If there's one thing I've carried with me all these years, etched deep into the lines of my face and the quiet moments of my mind, it's this. Family is not just a word on paper, a certificate, or a name shared at the dinner table. Family is defined by actions, by care, by presence, by consistency. It's what you do for each other when the world gets hard, when life throws punches, when survival isn't guaranteed. I was told I was dead at 16, and for a long time I believed that words could break you entirely, that the absence of someone who should have protected you was permanent, unchangeable. But I also learned, painfully and slowly, that actions, and the life you choose to live, carry a weight far heavier than any empty word. Words have power. I feel it even now, decades later, thinking about that night when my parents looked at me and said I didn't exist in their eyes. They didn't scream. They didn't shout. They didn't storm around. They simply spoke a sentence that reshaped my entire life, and in that silence I understood that some words once spoken are impossible to take back. They linger, they echo, they shape decisions long after the moment has passed. I learned that a single phrase could define your identity in ways you don't even realize until years later. But I also learned that those words only have power if you let them. I spent years learning not to let them define me, not to let them decide my worth, not to let them write my story for me. Some doors I discovered, once closed, can never open the same way again. My parents came back into my life eventually, and I could see them, hear them, touch them even, but the dynamic had shifted irreversibly. I had grown into someone strong, someone capable, someone whole in ways they had never imagined. I had built a life that was solid, grounded, and beautiful, and no apology, no plea, no confession could ever change the fact that I had lived 20 years without their presence and had survived. The door they slammed behind them didn't just close physically, it changed the rules of engagement forever. And that was a lesson I had to learn the hard way, painfully, irreversibly, and on my own. I don't hate my parents. I don't need to. Hate is a heavy, corrosive thing that slowly eats you from the inside. I realized that carrying resentment for decades would have made me a prisoner to the past, and I refused to remain in that cell. I outgrew the pain they caused me, but I didn't forget it. I acknowledged it, honored it, and used it as fuel to become stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Every struggle, every night of fear and hunger, every moment of self-doubt became a tool I wielded not to harm others, but to craft a life that could withstand anything. In reclaiming my power, I discovered freedom, the freedom to live fully, unapologetically, and without anyone else's permission. If you're listening to this, if you've ever felt the sharp sting of abandonment, the crushing weight of rejection, or the quiet pain of being told you didn't matter, hear me clearly. Your value is not dictated by the people who failed to recognize it. You do not need their permission to thrive. You do not need their acknowledgement to create something beautiful, lasting, and meaningful. Your life is yours. Your future is yours. And the choices you make now, the love you give yourself, the boundaries you hold, define your family more than any bloodline ever could. Sometimes the greatest